Welcome, everybody, to today's Building My Legacy podcast. I have with me today an amazing person who has a company called The Amazing CEO, also a book too with that title. But Anthony Flynn is amazing because of all of what he's accomplished. And I want to go through it because I think it's really important for you to know who he really is. He's an advisor to CEOs, key executives in their companies. He's been a leader with numerous Fortune 100 giants like Kraft Foods, R.J. Reynolds, 3M, and I have a whole page of a list of the people that he's worked with. So he's worked with many, many people. He has helped pioneer executives in several multi-million-dollar nonprofit ventures as well. He's been featured speaker at Harvard University, Emory University, Georgia Tech, the University of Memphis. He is a Biz 1190 Wall Street Journal syndicated radio show. He's been on TEDx, Q Conference, and other channels, so he is a highly sought after speaker. He has authored 2 books, The Execution Pipeline, a step-by-step guide to moving your business idea from dream to reality, and The Happiness Map, Finding Fulfillment in Life and Work. He has also formerly served as CEO of the 100 Black Men of Atlanta, and in addition to scaling his consulting practice, and currently serves as the CEO of Work, Faith, and Connection. You may be curious to know that besides having a bachelor's degree and master's degree, he holds a Master of Arts in Religion from the Memphis Theological Seminary. So you come with a very diverse background in terms of what you have done and what you bring in terms of perspective. So I'm going to just let you share with our audience first what your journey is, what brought you to where you have come, and how you've brought these 2 worlds together. So it's yours.
Well, Lois, first and foremost, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here with you. You are a giant in my eyes. And I of course, I read up on you. And then, of course, prior to us launching here, you shared a little bit about your story and background. And I'm super impressed and privileged to have this opportunity to spend time with you. So thank you for having me on and on this ride with you. So I come from a very unique set of circumstances. My mother was a teenage mother. She actually had me when she was pregnant at 16, before her senior year of high school. So she gave birth to me the summer before her senior year. Went into her senior year of high school, missed over 80 days that year, literally almost had to drop out of high school because we bounced around from house to house because we didn't have a solid foundation of residence. And so my mom really fought hard to try to give us the best life she could. Down the line, a gentleman finally came into the picture who eventually became a stepfather to me, and he helped us to stabilize. My biological father wasn't in my life. So I grew up and had a fairly, we never missed a meal, frankly, Lois, but life was fairly difficult in the communities where there were gangs and violence and crime. And I saw everything you can imagine. All the stuff you see in movies and on television, I literally lived it on a daily basis. And a big turning point for me was being able to be bused from an inner city school to a predominantly wealthy middle school. My mom and stepfather were able to afford moving into a community that was experiencing what we call white flight. And that community, previously would never have been affordable for us. But my mom became a secretary for a gentleman who owned a property in that community. And he made it possible for us to relocate just outside of a suburb called Germantown, right outside of Memphis, Tennessee. And they were rezoning schools, but prior to their rezoning, where we lived still allowed me to get bused to that middle school. And the reason that's so important is because that's where my world opened up. And I saw a vision I'd never seen before, where I saw, frankly, it may sound simple and commonplace to many people, but seeing dads show up at football practice, seeing moms volunteer at the school, seeing parents actually show up at PTA meetings, those little nuggets of wisdom, insight, and vision that I gathered really opened my mind up to the possibilities of the world around me, Lois. And so as a result, I spent the remainder of middle school, high school, and through college, trying to figure out ways that I could create a pathway in life where I could go back and reach into the trenches of the community I was reared in, if you will, and help people who came from backgrounds like my own. So fast forward, I'm a business major coming out of college. I graduate student of the year, my major. I worked for 3 Fortune 500 companies while in college. I worked for 2 Fortune 100 giants after college. I was salesperson of the year at 23 years old. I had the number one territory in the country. It wasn't technically salesperson of the year, but I had the number one sales territory in the country for RJ Reynolds. Then I went to 3M and I worked in their pharmaceutical division, and I had a 4-state territory, company car. I'm the youngest person in America in my role. They're promising me the world. I'm going to be this fast track executive, make millions of dollars. And that was the pivot point where I realized, okay, I could continue this path of success, but I'm going to leave behind the very people and the very dream that I brought with me to this point. And so, Lois, that began my journey of searching for my faith and finding more fulfillment as a promise in my life versus profit. Nothing wrong with profit. Let me be clear. But that's when I said, Anthony, you want to live more for purpose and let profit be a byproduct of purpose, not the other way around. A lot of people spend their life chasing profit, chasing profit, chasing profit. And then they hit the midlife crisis or later and they go, oh man, I don't have much fulfillment. I was blessed, Lois, to be able to find at 24 years old that I found the energy and I found the courage to walk away from corporate America and figure out what I wanted to do with my life, if you will. And that's when I enrolled in seminary. And so this idea of maintaining my core values and maintaining my faith as a part of my business endeavors, that's where that was birthed in my life.
What's interesting right now is I think we're beginning to hear more and more, especially from the millennials, how we pull all of this together. And we don't have good role models for people who pull it together. It's like we live in a world that's either or, and yet people are hungry for something that combines. So it's fascinating that you've been able to do it. So how do you do that in your consulting and the work that you do with companies?
Yep, great question. So I I literally lead with people as the epicenter of all of my consulting. So let me give you an example. I have a $100 million company that is headquartered in Southern California. It's a restaurant business, about 200 restaurants. It's a chain business, launched 26, 27 years ago now. And so when the CEO of the company, he called me in, and his goal is to essentially transition from Gen 1 to Gen 2. So he has two sons that are emerging as leaders of the company. So the first thing I did, instead of me looking at their processes, balance sheet, income statement, statement of cash flow, their processes, analyzing, da 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 da, I went in and said, let's talk about the people. Let's talk about the culture. Let's talk about the climate. Let's talk about the legacy that you want this company to leave behind. And so most of our consulting for the first 90 to 120 days was literally all about the people development aspect of their business, Lois, which is unique, right? Because if you look at some of your conventional consulting companies, they're going to come in and look at, systems, processes, analyze data, et cetera. And they think about growth through those veins of the business. I think about growth through the vein as people being the heartbeat of your business and how you care for, honor, and look out for your people and leverage your people to actually then enhance your systems and your processes on a daily basis. Now, there are some environments where I can bring my faith explicitly into those environments and into those cultures. However, in other environments, I'm very mindful and respectful of that not everyone shares the same faith. Yet, there is a set of core values, if you will, that I like to bring before the teams that I work with or the leaders that I work with, and leverage those core values as the epicenter of how I lead the process of consulting. So we still, don't get me wrong, I want to be crystal clear. The bottom line for me is still to help them increase productivity and profitability. I want to help them increase their top and bottom line, but I genuinely believe that doing it through the vein of people is primary. And so that's essentially my philosophy going in. And my process is to actually go into the company, work with the CEOs, key executives, truly understand the pain points and the problems they're trying to solve, start with the people side of addressing those problems and pain points, and then move on over to the pragmatic technical business side of that.
So you talk about the 8 steps to productivity in business, and you talk about it in life too. So you put it together in 2 ways. So is this part of what you talk about when you talk about the 8-step process to productivity? It's the people process, or where do you really go with this?
Well, to be honest, so I recorded the 8 steps of increasing productivity. The people are definitely a huge part of that. And what I did is actually, for those who want to take the time to go find it on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, I recorded 8 videos that
Nice.
actually, yeah, that actually provide insight of what those 8 steps are. And so if anyone is interested, they can go there and actually view those.
Okay, so you know what we'll do for those of you who are listening, we will put links to those 8 steps in our show notes. So you can easily find them and link up to what it is that Anthony is speaking about. So tell me, Anthony, what kind of pushback do you get as you work with companies?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's not natural, Lois, to, I mean, this is going to sound ridiculous, right? The world would be so much easier if we didn't have to deal with people,
Yeah,
right?
people have said that over the years. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, and it is hysterical, but nonetheless. So honestly, one of the greatest challenges I have is to really press my executives to lean into people more. And you think about it. I mean, yourself as an example. I mean, you are a high-powered go-getter. You get stuff done, and it's hard for high-powered go-getters to be around people who don't have the same ambition and energy and will to execute. And that's one of my that's one of my greatest challenges with those that I work with, because I've been blessed to really work with high performers, high capacity people who want it done yesterday, right? And they're willing to make the sacrifices and do the hard work and put in the labor and put in the work ethic to make it happen, as you yourself, right, Lois? Yet what they discover is that there aren't a lot of people around them who have that same drive, that same level of diligence, that same level of persistence and perseverance. That is one of the greatest challenges that I face with a lot of my executives. And so constantly having to remind them to dig in and pour into their people. That's very difficult for a high performer, right? Because you're like, why should I have to set your alarm clock for you and come in your room and tap you on the shoulder to get you up, to get out of bed, to go do the work you signed up for, that you said you were going to do? and yet I like to tell a lot of my clients, you are AKA a professional nag, right? Because you're going to have to constantly remind the people around you and constantly show them how to keep up with the vision and the ambition that you've laid out before them. And that's a really, really difficult thing for a lot of leaders to do.
You do a lot of work with athletes,
Mm-hmm.
football players, other people as well. What drew you into that, and how did people find you, and how do you find they're highly motivated, but are the issues and challenges similar?
So several questions. I'm going to make sure I'm not as intelligent as you, so bear
Oh,
with me.
yeah.
As I try
Hardly.
So yes, I do work with a lot of high profile athletes, entertainers, et cetera. So first of all, how they found me. I was actually a decent athlete. I signed a Division I football scholarship, and I didn't get into all this detail at the beginning of it all, but nonetheless, I went away on a full football scholarship and ended up coming back home after a semester because I had a roommate who was literally selling hard drugs out of our room. So I was in a small town, Lois, where I realized I didn't want my life disrupted by this community of people who I didn't think could who could help me fulfill my dreams.
Yeah.
So again, it may sound crazy, but a kid from poverty in my situation, I didn't have a lot of alternatives. So I thought I can either stay here and hang with these guys or give it all up, go back home and try to chart a different path for myself. So I gave up a football scholarship, but many of the athletes trusted me because of my courage to make that type of decision and because they saw the integrity in which I carried myself through college and beyond. So later on, as many of my friends were signing these multi-million-dollar contracts, I was the guy they called and said, hey, man, I want to set up this business or I want to set up this foundation. Will you come in and support me in these efforts? And as a result of that, my name got around in some of these circles. And I've been working with athletes for the last, 20 years as a result of that. The second part of your question was, do I see similar challenges?
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And here's what's interesting. Think about people who are, if you will, best in class, literally top in the world at something. And now they're trying to make a pivot to something entirely different. It is psychologically challenging. It is, emotionally challenging. It's spiritually challenging. Many of these athletes that I work with are going through the greatest crisis of their life when they give up something that they've been known for. Their identity has been tied to being the best in the world at something. And all of a sudden you've got to start over again and go to the bottom of the pool. You're not at the top anymore. You're going to the very bottom with a start over. The similarity, right, is for many of our executives. I mean, you mentioned you had an opportunity to exit a massive business that you were blessed to grow. A lot of people don't know how to rebound from that, Lois, because they spent all this time and pouring in their expertise and wisdom into building something. It's like, okay, now I just had an exit. What do I do with my life now? Mm-hmm. And that creates a major crisis for a lot of people. There's a similarity with many of the athletes that I work with. And so helping people back to my point on the DNA of my process is centered around the people. I've got to make sure that I don't isolate business problems from people problems, because you can have a heck of a run in business, but have a miserable life at home. And at some point it's going to come crashing down. And here's what the way my process works is I don't want to see I don't want to see you fall. But just as important is you have a lot of livelihoods. You have the livelihood of many people around you who are also counting on you as a CEO or an executive to be successful. They're putting their trust and their family's livelihood in your hands, if you will, as a metaphor. And so I want to help people make sure that they understand the impact and the implications of their decisions, that it doesn't just impact you. It impacts everybody around you. So when you make a decision, you have to think about that.
What's interesting is there's a challenge for courage in stepping forward into like athletics or being CEO. It takes courage to let it go and move on and find something different. And yet the skill set is somewhat similar, but people don't always make that transition. Somewhere sometimes the courage diminishes as the challenge shifts. And I think this is important because I think we're going to see more and more people having to pivot more often. Because I think uncertainty is only going to continue. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, to your point on, I think that what it takes to pivot, a lot of, let me back up. I'm sorry, because a lot of things are running through my mind, but let me say this. Here's where I see the difficulty for a lot of people to actually make pivots. Okay. So if you think about, I was just talking about athletes, but let's make it, more, let's bring it home a bit for the average person who doesn't have the privilege of going on to become an NFL or NBA or Major League Baseball player. So most of us from birth, Lois, we're born into an environment, whether good or bad, whether we want to label it good or bad, the environment tells us how to think from birth. Then we go to kindergarten and elementary school, and the people around us, they tell us how to think in middle school, high school, college. I mean, you have the privilege of going on to achieve your Ph.D. Very few people in the grand scheme, percentage wise, have the privilege of achieving a PhD. But yet, for so long, we've been trained how to think. And so for many people, their success comes from the world around them teaching them how to think. And then all of a sudden, when it's time to pivot, usually the pivot presents you with an opportunity where you haven't necessarily had the skill set developed over the years to know how to respond to that moment of when it's time to pivot, right? And so that's where I think the lack of courage to move for many people, it occurs right there at that spot, right? When it's time to pivot. Most people don't have the courage because they haven't had the training, if you will. And whether that's PhD or I like to say PhD, right? Where life, where life has trained you on the battlefield to learn how to pivot. Many people haven't had that privilege of having enough circumstances in their lives that present them with opportunities that they haven't seen before. And so it creates major issues and major challenges, even for some of the people who are best in the world at something, like the athletes that I'm talking about. And I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, completely. So I think one of the things we tend to look at our education and those professional networks as where we gain encouragement, support, right? But I think there's going to be a new need for people to figure out who will help push you to grow, and being able to also change that out as you grow, because your needs will change. You may come back because they'll grow too, hopefully. But I think there's a new mindset that we're going to have to bring, and that is, how are we going to help one another really move and grow? Are you seeing that at all, or is that just my notion?
I am. And thank you. You bring up a great point. So this is where I highly encourage people to consider getting, so I call these my productivity filters: what you watch, what you read, what you listen to, and who you hang around. Now, those sound very basic, but in reality, most of us have a homogeneous set of productivity filters, meaning we essentially hang around the same people who are more like us than not, and then we ultimately read what they read, watch what they watch, listen to what they listen to, etc. And we're not diversifying ourselves enough, Lois, to the point you made, where as the world around us evolves, as the economy evolves, as principles of leadership evolves, as generations evolve, we're not diverse enough to evolve with them because we've been so set on homogeneity. And so I really want to encourage those who are listening or watching, if you will, to really think about diversifying your productivity filters so that by virtue of that, you have the ability to pivot and diversify your success, because you can be wildly successful at a thing, blockbuster, and then a Netflix comes along and wipes you off the face of the planet because you were wildly successful at a thing, but never really diversified your portfolio, your thinking, your culture, the people you hired, et cetera. And as a result, you were successful to a point of fault and you fell off the face of the planet. And I think that happens for a lot of us in our personal lives as well, is we're so homogenous in our approach that we miss evolution when it's time to actually evolve.
So,
And I agree with you. It's time to start surrounding yourself with people who don't look like you, who don't think like you, who come from different backgrounds, who have different, for example, there's a great book by Daniel Pink. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. If you've heard of Daniel, he wrote the book called A Whole New Mind. And he makes the claim in the book that the Master of Fine Arts degree, the MFA, is the new MBA. And his philosophy, right, is that a lot of companies are hiring creatives to help connect the dots between this linear fashion of thinking, the linear fashion of business, with the imagination to connect with this crowded and noisy world. And so that's a great example of a resource that speaks to the need to think outside of the box as you try to evolve with this evolving climate, economically, racially, politically, et cetera.
Right. I resonate with that because I often get asked, how on earth could you create as many patents and trademarks as you have, right? And I say it's because I have so many disciplines in my heart and my mind. And so I have no rules. All I have to do is ask a question and my mind goes in different directions. Now, sometimes that can be like a cart with horses going in every direction, but ultimately they come back together and you have a different perspective that you bring. And I think that's what companies are going to be looking for. And you're so right. If you can't look at different people, different thought processes, different ways of doing things, it's going to be very hard to get there. So I think the other thing with that, though, is people don't know how to create those networks that are different from them. So advice, tips that you have on that?
Yes, start with one. Just remember that statement. In other words, you know, don't 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 overwhelm yourself by going out and trying to solve all the world's problems, if you will, as a metaphor, by trying to reach everybody at once. Find one person, find one book, find one idea, one podcast, one TV show, whatever the case, that you believe stretches you out of your comfort zone, and lean into that a bit, and let it become a snowball, a trickling snowball effect of diversifying yourself again through those productivity filters, what you watch, what you read, what you listen to, who you hang around. Because Lois, I mean, this change is hard for many people, right? And to some extent it's hard for all of us. I mean, but the way you can train yourself to embrace change more is to change more. You be proactive about change so that as change comes, it feels like a natural thing to you. I'm not telling someone who's a master, I mean, you are a PhD, so I'm not telling a master not to continue to perfect their mastery. You can continue to perfect your mastery while at the same time creating space for new ideas, new thoughts, et cetera. So making it pragmatic for people, there are 168 hours in a week. If you just took, so 5%, right, would be, 8 hours. Well, what if you just said, for 2.5% of my time on a weekly basis, I'm going to take 2.5% of my time, 4 hours of my time, and do something different over the course of 60 to 90 days, whether it's changing up your workout routine, or whether it's, again, engaging podcast, or, okay, if 2.5% is too much, cut it to 1%, or whatever the case. I mean, you can find an hour or two in a week where you can just do something radically different that would jolt you a bit out of your comfort zone. And yet you don't have to compromise or forsake your continued progress of mastering the thing or the things that you want to master.
Anthony, what will be your legacy? What do you want to leave as a legacy?
May sound simple, but I'm a first generation, practically everything, first generation married, first generation college grad, first generation entrepreneur, first generation CEO, I want my kids, my son and daughter, to be able to continue the work that I'm doing to impact the world around me. And to me, I've won if I finish well with my wife and my two beautiful children, and hopefully my grandchildren one day. And believe it or not, that is success for me. I think everything else is a byproduct. I'm grateful that I'm blessed to, be able to live where I live, or, go the places I go for vacation, et cetera. All of that's great. But I think at the core of me, I know that if I were on my deathbed, what would matter most is having my wife and my two beautiful children, and one day, hopefully my grandchildren, around the bed with me, saying my goodbyes to them. And in all sincerity, that drives me on a daily basis. And I don't get too caught up in the other stuff.
Amazing. Our time is almost up, Anthony. So things that we've missed, things that you would like to make sure that we cover and talk about. What are your comments that you want to leave?
Yes, I want to leave with this thought. Most people, here's a statement, Lois, and I want to make sure I'm clear about this. Most people overestimate who they actually are, but underestimate their capacity to become. And here's what I mean by that. Let me elaborate. So let me say it again. Most people overestimate who they actually are or where they actually are, but also grossly underestimate their capacity to become. So the world around us pushes us toward a tendency to want to perform for others. What that means sometimes for us, Lois, is that by wanting to perform for others, we have, imposter syndrome. We pretend to be where we're actually not, or someone we're actually not. When in fact, we're capable of becoming that very person, but we'd rather put on the facade of who we are instead of doing the actual work to become that real person.
Right.
And I hope that makes sense.
No, I think that's so true. And I think that's the hook where people often get hung up, is because we have so much positivity that people forget that there's work that's involved. And it doesn't just fall onto your lap. It is a really progressive, hard work effort that you put in. I mean, does it have to overwhelm you? No, if you do it in a logical way. But I think it's so important because I see so many young people who just think they can go from graduation to CEO and then flounder because they don't have the tools.
Absolutely. And with my personal story, I had to learn through coaching, through therapy, through a lot of work, as you said. The truth of the matter is, I, Anthony Flynn, am a product of a teenage mother born in poverty and gang infested, crime infested, et cetera, in a gang infested, crime infested environment. And there's a lot that comes with that, a lot of baggage, a lot of challenges, a lot of barriers. So the more I'm in touch with that reality, Lois, the more I can address and counter those barriers. So instead of running from my issues, my problems, my childhood, and even my adult issues, right? Instead of running from them, I embrace them with the intention of actually being able to address those barriers. And as a result, the byproduct is that I've been able to accomplish the things I've been able to accomplish because I embrace that pain and that journey versus running from it and trying to pretend like it doesn't exist to try to impress people around me.
That's such a powerful story. And I appreciate that because every single person has something that they have to address. The question is the willingness to do it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Anthony. And thank you, those of you who are listening to Building My Legacy podcast. We're going to have information about Anthony's books in the show notes. We will also have links to his YouTube, so you can go there and listen to his YouTubes. And also, you can find out more information about us by going to our website, www.buildtomorrow.com, and to our Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube pages for buildtomorrow.com. It's also LinkedIn. So thank you so much for being with us today.
It's been an absolute honor, and I look forward to doing this again soon, Lois.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching my video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell button above. Leave comments. We'd love to hear what you think. And visit our other social media links as well. Thanks much.